What is up? It's Mist. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about some free agents this upcoming offseason. We're going to be breaking down their decision process and we'll be giving you a prediction. Let's get right into it. So for today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys 5 different free agents. I'll list them off right now and then we'll just get right into it. So the 5 guys we're going to have here are Kawhi Leonard, John Collins, Mike Conley, DeMar DeRozan, and Kyle Lowry. Those 5 guys are the guys I'm going to be talking about today, breaking down their contract situations, breaking down some of the teams I think they could end up on, and then ultimately I'll give you the team I think they will end up getting onto this offseason, and then I'll break down why I think that and what I think the other options could be. I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate, but ultimately I'll push pretty strong on the point I want to make, which is the team that I think they will end up on next season. So for the first guy I'm going to be talking about, it's Kawhi Leonard, currently on the Los Angeles Clippers. He currently has he's currently playing on the current contract that he is on, which is technically supposed to expire in 2 years. However, this year he has a player option. Now, Paul George, his teammate, the guy who he kind of brought in to play with him to be that superstar duo in the West, he's kind of the guy who brought Kawhi Leonard here originally. He's being paid about the same amount as he is. However, Paul George, earlier on this year, he signed an extension with the Clippers that should be going through the 2024-2025 season. Now, Kawhi Leonard has yet to sign an extension. He has a player option for this year for just over $36 million. And now, I personally think that he will just opt into that. I don't know if he's eligible to sign an extension. I believe he is, but I don't think he can actually sign it for that long. I think it can only be for like 2 or 3 years. However, I do not expect him to sign one. I just believe that it is in his best interest right now to keep going with what he's got now with the Clippers, and then next year he'll be able to sign on a much longer, or hopefully a longer contract, depending on how well the Clippers are doing. By the way, this will not be the last mention of the Clippers. I will definitely be bringing them up later in the video. I do think, though, that Kawhi Leonard, after this current contract, will likely sign an extension or sign another long-term deal, I guess, with the team. I really think that it makes a lot of sense for them to get Kawhi Leonard back. Obviously, he's one of the best players in the NBA right now, but I think it's really just crucial for them to get him, because without him, you kind of lose that entire value that you've got there, because you've forfeited most of your draft capital for the next few years because of the Paul George trade, and now once you let up Kawhi Leonard, you're really losing a lot of value. You've signed a lot of role players to big, hefty contracts. You'll definitely be in the luxury tax, or you'll definitely be at least over the salary cap for a long, long time. You're going to be paying a lot extra to hopefully keep this team together, and if you're not winning a title, then or at least you're not contending for one, it's going to be very, very hard it's going to be very, very financially taxing on the owners. I really think, it's as simple as that. I really hope this is one of the more simple ones of the video. Kawhi Leonard really just got to opt into that contract. That's my prediction. I think it's very likely. Either that or he signs an extension. I really don't see another place that has the cap space and everything that Kawhi Leonard wants for Kawhi Leonard to actually leave. There's definitely a possibility that a team like the Knicks offers him a ton of money, and that simply is just attractive enough for him. I really don't think that happens. Obviously, you never know, but I think at this point we're just that close to knowing that I think it's pretty safe to say that Kawhi Leonard will be a Clipper next year. Now, the next guy that I think actually has to be talked about is going to be John Collins. He's a restricted free agent, but considering the amount of trade talk about him going into the trade deadline, he didn't get traded, but he's currently on the Hawks, and I think what's very likely going to happen is that he'll sign a deal elsewhere, but I think ultimately he'll be matched by the Atlanta Hawks. I don't think there's a way that Atlanta chooses to part ways from John Collins, just because I don't really think there's a huge market for a power forward like him, who's not necessarily the best stretching the floor. Obviously, yes, he can also play the 5, but I think he fits that similar role as Aaron Gordon. It's just likely that I think teams will want to give a lot more for him, and if it's really not anything more than $25 million, which I don't think any team will give him, I think the Hawks will gladly match it. I think there's been a lot of consideration that people will say, like, oh, what if they give him the max? Oh, do you think the Hawks would still match the max? I don't even think John Collins at this point would make the max, just because of the bleak market for power forwards. Like, a lot of teams would be willing to run a guy like Jason Tatum, who I think 2 or 3 years ago would be viewed as a small forward, and maybe even a shooting guard a while ago. But now he's definitely a power forward, and I think you think about it, and it's like, oh, so our team's really going to be paying upwards of $20 million to get a guy like John Collins who really fits into the fold, to the mold of a four. And I mean, I just don't think that the market is too high for guys like that. So I really think it really only works with offensive minded centers. So I really think the only team that would actually be willing to give up or to pay John Collins that much money would end up being the Minnesota Timberwolves. However, I don't think they would end up doing it, and even if they did, I don't think the Hawks would let him go like that. Maybe there would be some sort of sign and trade involved. I think that's the second most likely scenario, and I would not be surprised at all if they do it. So it's definitely going to be one of those two options. Either John Collins will be an Atlanta Hawk next year, or he will be on the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think both of those options are very realistic considering rumors from the past as well as just common sense and logic. But I do think both of those should be heavily considered by both teams. If you're the Hawks, I don't really think you should let John Collins go just because he fits so well with Trae Young and that current dynamic duo. And then I think if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves, I think you have to look at, well, we have a guy like Karl-Anthony Towns, and I think you think about what the Nuggets are doing with Jokic and how they traded for Aaron Gordon, another athletic four, very similar to Collins as I mentioned previously, and you just add two guys. It's just simple center power forward combo because you have your big offensive minded center, and then you have your cutter, you have your just athletic four who can really do everything. Not even necessarily the best defensive IQ, but they block shots. They know what they're doing, and they get stuff done. So I think that would definitely have to be the move for John Collins. He should either be signing a deal with the Timberwolves or he should be signing an extension with the Hawks. I think both of those are very realistic. I don't think there's any other way around it. You should most likely see John Collins in a uniform with the word Hawks on it or the word Timberwolves on it. I don't think there's really a debate for either one of those to happen, for anything other than one of those to happen. The next guy up here is Mike Conley, and I think it's very realistic that Mike Conley will be a Utah Jazz next year. I really don't think there's going to be a big market for a guy like him just because I think he's at the point in his career where he's going to want at least $15 million for sure. And I think he's deserving of it very much if you look at advanced statistics. Pin him as one of the best players in the NBA, both offensively and defensively. Now, I think that's a lot of the Jazz just being a really good team, and just they have really good team basketball when he's on the floor. I think he's just a guy like that who's a mold. I don't necessarily think his actual impact is there statistically when you look at just the box score, but when you really take a deep dive into it, he really does bring a large impact. But I do not think that'll ever be enough to earn him this year. I don't think that'll be enough. I think the advanced stats are just going to be enough to push him over the edge of like $15 to $20 million. And I just think because there are not many teams looking for a point guard like Mike Conley this upcoming offseason, I think he'll just end up re-signing with the Jazz on maybe a 2 to 3 year deal, maybe about $15 to $17 million. Maybe it'll be a bit up of $17 million, but I don't think it's very likely considering Mike Conley's age, and I think considering the way the Jazz are going, I think they might try to add a third cemented superstar. I don't know how likely that'll be, but I mean, when you look at the competition they're going to end up facing, they really need to make sure that their role players are doing very well, and without that, it's going to be very hard for them. But I think the first step for the Utah Jazz is really just going to be re-signing Mike Conley. Not to mention that if Mike Conley re-signing with the Jazz, I think is a great move for Mike Conley because it gives him the opportunity to actually play on a very good team. Whereas if he were to leave the Jazz, I don't think there are very many teams that would be willing to give him that much money and also end up giving him a huge role. Like, I think maybe a team like the Knicks would want to give him a lot of money, but what role will he have there, and it'll be a sizable role for sure, but considering the young guys who they want to develop on that team, I don't think it's very realistic that he's going to be that into a role there where he's not necessarily going to be contending. And then maybe you look at a team like the Sixers. Do they have the cap space? Probably not. Think about a team like the Celtics. Again, do they have the cap space? Probably not. I'm really just naming teams, but I really don't think there are many that could be realistic scenarios for Mike Conley other than the Utah Jazz. So if I had to make a prediction right now, 100% would be Utah Jazz. There really just isn't another team that could be anywhere near signing Mike Conley just because cap issues. He's going to be wanting a lot of money. And by the way, as he deserves, no question about that. He's an all-star this year for good reason. I preached that. I think he was debatably, advanced stats would put him as the number one guy on the number one team at the All-Star break, so I really don't think there's a question that he should have been an All-Star this year. And I think once you're an All-Star, coming off of that contract, no matter your age, you should be getting around $15 to $17 million at the minimum. Now this is where the video is going to start getting a bit spicy. I think the next guy who we're going to be talking about is DeMar DeRozan. Now he's currently on the San Antonio Spurs, and I think what the Spurs are going to have to do this year is they're going to have to let him go. Just when you look at the direction that roster is going, it's not like DeMar DeRozan should really be there long term. DeMar DeRozan, obviously, he is not the youngest guy ever. He really just does not fit the timeline of that team in any way whatsoever. It's kind of sad to see that DeMar DeRozan still hasn't been able to win a title. He's 31 years old at the moment, and I really want him to win a title. So the team I'm actually going to have him going to is the Phoenix Suns. Now, I looked at the cap table, and if they wanted to do some sort of sign and trade, it could definitely get done. I think it would have to be something along the lines of a sign and trade where you're giving back at least Dario Saric, Jalen Smith, and probably Javon Carter as well to at least get to somewhere like $20 million for this year, which is around what I think DeMar DeRozan would get in an open market. And I think that would make a lot of sense for both sides. I think it just makes a lot of sense for both of those, for two teams that are to agree on a deal. The Suns would continue to be just an amazing team. They'd be able to run out a starting five of Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, Jay Crowder, and DeMar DeRozan. That would be an amazing starting five. Then off the bench, you would have something along the lines of Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and then you'd probably be able to sign guys just to make it work. I believe they also have their first-round pick this year. So if they are able to get a young guy in the draft, that'd be really amazing. Obviously, Chris Paul's contract will expire, and hopefully they'll be able to bring him back or sign another point guard in his place for much cheaper. Once that Chris Paul contract does expire, though, I think it'll be much easier for them to maneuver around the cap, and they'll be able to just be a bit more flexible. They only have $68 million in the books in 2 seasons. Obviously, they're going to have to pay DeAndre Ayton, but you never know how much DeAndre Ayton's going to end up getting in the open market, and if you don't have to match anything over $17 million, that would be huge. If they don't have to pay $17 million, then, and Chris Paul is only looking for about $20 million, then you're definitely getting a lot more money. I don't even know if Chris Paul would be getting $20 million. Obviously, that's on the condition that you re-sign him, but if you were to be able to get him back, then you would have a really, really good team going forward. And I think you would definitely be contending for titles. You'd have a really good team, and it would definitely make sense. Obviously, there's going to be some sort of cap issue or at least some sort of issue where there's some sort of hesitance for the Suns to give up on Jalen Smith, or just to give up on Dario Saric because he's been having an amazing year for them this year. But ultimately, I think it's what's best for them. If you give up either of those guys up in this trade, you're definitely making progress with your team. You're becoming better. You're adding DeMar DeRozan, who's having an amazing season this year. Amazing job for him, and I don't really think there's any way you can get around that. He's just been an amazing guy this year, and there's not much more to say. DeMar DeRozan to the Suns, it makes sense. It might not happen, but it's something I think every NBA fan would like to see because it would give DeMar that chance to hopefully win a title, and I think that team would 100% stand a chance against the top teams of the league, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, the Sixers. They would stand a chance. The Nets, not to mention the Nets, I think they would have a maybe not an easy time against the Nets, but I think they definitely cause the Nets some problems, and I think that's just what would make sense. Now, the last guy that has to be mentioned is someone whose name was thrown in around trade talks at the end of the trade deadline. He never ended up getting traded, and now he's going to be an unrestricted free agent this season, and that man is Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry currently is being paid around $30 million, and it should expect to drop by about $10 million come this offseason. Now, I think the destinations for him, obviously, as I've talked about guys earlier, there's just not a lot of teams that have open cap space this season and are willing to spend it on veterans. But I think the team that actually will be willing to put some big chips in to get a guy like him and would definitely want to do it. And I think that team is going to have to be the Los Angeles Clippers. I expect the Los Angeles Clippers to make a big offer at the Raptors in a sign and trade for Kyle Lowry, something along the lines of Luke Kennard, Pat Beverly, and maybe a Daniel Oturu, Terrence Mann, or a Reggie Jackson, In addition, I think if you are able to add those guys, I think it's almost a done deal that the Clippers are going to be a top 3 team. You can run out a team of Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Marcus Morris, Serge Ibaka, and Kyle Lowry. And then off the bench, you would have something along the lines of Rajon Rondo, Zubats Patterson, Batum, Jackson, Man, O'Toole. That's just listing the roster, but obviously they'd be able to fill in guys like they might have some exceptions that they could work with to get some stuff done. But nonetheless, I really think that getting a guy like Kyle Lowry would really make the Clippers probably the best team in the league defensively, because you just look at that roster and it's full of just amazing defenders left and right. And once you add a guy like Kyle Lowry there who can really be just another voice that keeps this team going, I think he was one of the big reasons that they were able to win the title in 2019, just because they had a guy like Kyle Lowry to be just a big locker room voice for them. And I think if you really think about it, it's realistic because that Luke Kennard extension will kick in. He'll be being paid around $12 million. Obviously, looking back, that's not a great extension. But now that you think about it, it might get us Kyle Lowry. That's really good. Obviously, that might be a bit hard for the Raptors to take on, but if they're able to get something and they think they can salvage Luke Kennard, who, by the way, has had a bit of a comeback. He's just not really been consistent at all this year. He's only 24, so I wouldn't say, oh no, he's done for. He's averaging 7 points this year. Just really not anything amazing. He's 47% from 3, but it's not like it's just the most consistent thing, as he's really only shooting 3.5 attempts a game, which obviously is good, but it's really just like, it's really underwhelming, I think, considering the I guess the output I think they were hoping to get from him. Shot 6.5 threes last year, and obviously he's taking a decrease in minutes because last year he played on Detroit, one of the worst teams in the league. But nonetheless, I really think that if you're able to match up those contracts with getting a guy, and you're able to get a guy like Kyle Lowry, then there is no question that the Clippers should do it, because I think at that point you're really bringing that team just right exactly where it needs to be. That's the perfect guy you can get. And I really think getting him would just almost solidify your title chances. If not, if it doesn't solidify it, gets you so damn close that really, if you're not title favorites at that point, you're close enough to be satisfied. And once you fill out the roster, once it's good enough, you should be very satisfied with that. And I think you can just go into the next season and get really close to a title. That's going to be it for the video. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. Comment if you agree or disagree with any of these predictions. If you disagree with anything I've said, just let me know in the comments. I'm up for debate all the time. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.